good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Today's word is podcasts. Me and podcasts go way back. Currently, I'm not listening to one, which is interesting. I'm walking to work currently. It's 6 o'clock in the morning, which is why I'm being brave and filming outside and giving you a different environment to watch me in. So I love podcasts, and I don't know if I'm going to include it here or clip it on at the end. I'm going to talk about all my favourite podcasts that I listen to right now, or podcasts I've listened to in the past. But I have this weird thing with music where I get sick of listening to music every now and again. So I stop listening to music. When I was younger, before I found podcasts, I'd just walk in silence or do whatever I need to do in silence. And I hate it. It was awful. My mind just started going, and it wasn't the best. But then I discovered podcasts, and I don't remember the first podcast that I ever discovered or how I discovered them, but that was it then. That was like a turning point. So now I go from music to podcast to music, music to podcast, depending on how I feel at the time. Sometimes I get really sick of what I'm listening to, podcast-wise as well, and I'll swap to music. But it's very rare because the amount of different podcasts that I listen to that are all so different is unbelievable. This is super awkward for me. I also have been on a podcast. So me and Jack have always wanted to do a podcast together, and when we were a lot younger we did one. We did a gaming podcast, me and our friend Alec, as well as Jack obviously. And at the time I didn't work, or if I did, it was very, very part-time, and I didn't really know much about current gaming scenes. They'd be like, I'm currently playing this game that just came out, it was super expensive, but I wouldn't know that game and I wouldn't be able to talk about that game. Just that I wanted to play it, or I'd seen people play it, or I'd played it at Jack's house or something, so I couldn't really talk about it. It was really difficult for me. So what I used to do is I used to talk about games that I play at the minute, or I turned it into a segment. I turned one of the segments into on this day, so we do it monthly, and I'd be like, so we're in June, and all of these games 20 years ago came out in June. Can you believe it's been 20 years? And we talk about that. The podcast would go 2.5 hours because we talk about the main stuff, and then I talk about that for an hour, and we get so wrapped up in it we'd forget what we were doing. And then life gets busier. Both of us, all three of us in the end, actually got full-time jobs, and it just fizzles out, and it's a shame. But we really enjoyed doing that podcast, so much so that I am considering starting a new podcast that I want to do. I've wanted to do for a while, and we'll see. It might happen. Hopefully it'll happen, and you'll be filled in on all those details when it comes around. But that's the aim. Hopefully one day I'll be podcasting again soon, as I absolutely loved it. I loved doing the research beforehand. I didn't think I'd ever say that, but I'd sit and research for days before we'd do the podcast. Can you tell I need a haircut? I'd sit there for days and research before the podcast. I absolutely love doing it, so I'm planning to do that in a environment that I would be more knowledgeable about, I suppose is the word. So hopefully that's something that's going to come up very soon. I am going to mention a couple of podcasts on my way, because I've hit this point of the walk earlier than I thought I would, I think, in my head. I could be walking really slow right now. I'm shitting myself, I'm going to be late for work, but we'll go with it, we'll see how it goes. So currently I'm listening to Beautiful Anonymous, which is a very, very good podcast. 1 hour, one phone call, no names, no holds barred or something. He has a little speech at the start of his thing. Basically, a caller will ring his show, they will talk for a full hour, they can't know each other's name. Well, obviously everyone knows the host names, he can't know their name, and it's up to them what they talk about. And I've listened to some extremely sad stories, funny stories, life stories, some people just talking about just general life things that they just want to get off their chest. It's crazy the amount of stuff I've listened to on that podcast. And I found that podcast, one of my new favourite podcasts, I found while I was listening to, what's the other podcast called that I listened to? Angel of Vine. That's what it's called. So I listen to a lot of podcasts now. Well, I listened to 2 podcasts recently that have been stories. So this one was called Angel of Vine, and it was based around a fiction podcast about a true life fiction event. Basically, someone was killed on Vine in America, and their bones were splayed out behind them to make them look like an angel. And it was about a out of work private eye trying to figure out who did it. That was a 10-episode podcast that I was like, this is so interesting. I can't even remember how I found out about it. This is so interesting that I need to know more. And I did. I listened to the whole thing. And it's literally 10 episodes, maybe 40 minutes an episode. So you like blaze through it. It was brilliant. I absolutely loved it. And then I found Beautiful Anonymous from that. Then I found a Wolverine podcast that's the same sort of setup as Angel of Vine, where it would talk you through a story, a Wolverine story, and it was set up through Marvel, and it's got some really good names in it, and so did Angel of Vine, like some like proper actors that you're like, whoa, I didn't expect this to be happening. So it's almost like an audiobook but in podcast form. Oh, I love it. I absolutely loved it. I listened to a wrestling podcast, Solomon's Sounds Off, my favourite wrestling podcast. I listen to it constantly. I used to listen to Talk Is Jericho, for like wrestling podcast fans out there. What was the other one I used to listen to? I used to listen to Colt Cabana's wrestling podcast. That was brilliant. I used to really enjoy that one for like stories from like wrestlers and stuff. That one was really cool. And I am almost at my friend's house to meet them for work, so I will let you know other ones I have listened to as well when I get home. But I hope you enjoyed this little change of scenery. It's a few days later, and I do apologise for that, and my battery's low, but I'm going to try and finish off this video anyway. So I listened to other podcasts like Talk Is Jericho. I haven't listened to that for a while though, since he's not really doing wrestler interviews anymore. It's why I used to listen to Colt Cabana's podcast a lot, which is to hear like that sort of thing. And I've just been flicking through and he doesn't do them very often anymore. Doughboys is another one I used to listen to a lot. That was a pretty cool podcast. And then just a tip, Megan Batoon, her podcast was interesting. I listen to that every now and again, I'd dip in and out. When I went to that Showstopper, improvised workshop, they advertised their podcast while we were there. That's a monthly podcast, and every guest they get on talks about their experience in the West End and things, and then does an improvised song with them at the end. They've had people like Dan Gillespie Sells, who wrote all the music for Everybody's Talking About Jamie on there, Marcus Brigstock, Sue from Mel and Sue is the only way I can describe her, but she was doing, I think it was Sue, no, it was Mel Gilroy. Maybe it was both of them, I can't remember, but one of them was on there doing the podcast from, what were they in? Company, they were in Company, so I think it was Mel. In fact, I'm certain it was Mel. And that was a fun podcast. That's a good podcast as well, but the one I listened to the most, which I mentioned in the video earlier, was is definitely Films to Bury With for a start, but not that one. Anonymous, Beautiful Anonymous. Brilliant, I absolutely love it. I listened to like 3 episodes in between that episode and this episode because it's been a few days, and I absolutely love it. So yeah, that's my podcast choices and podcast history and possibly future. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you again in the next one.